What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. Today I'm going to analyze the meta of Memphis Regionals, which just happened this past weekend. I'm going to talk about the decks that did well, why they did well, why some decks didn't do as well as expected, what some of the good meta calls were, and what we can expect in the League Cups happening in the rest of Quarter 2, based on the Memphis Regionals meta. So first we're going to look at the meta share of Day 2, which was top 35. It was top 35 because there were 35 players that finished with a record of 7-2 or better, which makes day 2 go past the normal top 32. So Zoroark Lycanroc 10 spots in day 2. Holy crap, that's a lot for a new deck as well. People knew about this deck. It's been doing well at League Cups, but this is its first showing at a major tournament outside of Japan. Next is Buzzwole Lycanroc with 9 spots in day 2. This deck took, I believe, 2 spots of top 8 at the EUIC, but it didn't get talked about as much as I thought it would. I didn't hear a lot of hype on this deck up until the very week leading up to Memphis. Most of the hype was around Zoroark Golisopod, which is next. Zoroark Golisopod took 3 spots. So it looks like people decided to go with the Zoroark Lycanroc instead, but I'm sure there were still a lot of Zoroark Golisopod at the tournament, and 3 still made day 2, which is a respectable number. Next is Vikavolt at 3 spots, which Vikabulu has been, a lot of people love it and a lot of people love to hate it. People say it's a joke deck or not a real deck. I think a lot of people are turned off by its inconsistencies and its clunkiness, which I completely agree with. I think the deck on paper looks really, really great, and when my opponent plays it, it looks really, really great because they have 2 Vikavolts out. But I don't usually have that kind of luck when I play it, so I've set that deck aside to play some things that are a little more consistent. The next one is just a little out of order here, but no worries. So Decidueye Zoroark had 2 slots in day 2, and so did Gardevoir GX. So Decidueye Zoroark has some hype on it. I think it's a pretty good deck. It's not tier 1, but I think it's tier 2. It's strong. Excuse me. I believe Igor Costa is one of the players to day 2 with it. A really good player, and I know he plays Decidueye. He likes Decidueye. Excuse me. But yeah, I think Decidueye Zoroark's a good deck. I didn't expect too much more than 2 spots in day 2. I was thinking maybe like 4 or 5 spots, but it's still not too bad. 2 spots is respectable. But Gardevoir GX, this is where the surprise is. Only 2 Gardevoir decks in day 2. Now, a lot of people might have a lot of different reasons why this was. I will talk about that later in the video. But yeah, 2 spots in day 2 for what has been called the best deck in format, Gardevoir GX. A little surprise in Golisopod GX Garbodor taking a spot in day 2 and getting 2nd place. Golisopod Garbodor I will talk about a little bit more in its own section of this video. The rest of the decks, we have Venusaur Shining Genesect, which was an archetype that we know about it, but no one has thought it's very good. It's more of a rogue deck or a fun deck. But Harrison, I mentioned his name later. Harrison, I believe his last name starts with a G. He finished in 10th place with this deck, so congrats to him for building a deck that not a lot of people thought was viable, and he did really, really well with it. Then there was 1 Volcanion, 1 Greninja Break, 1 Buzzwole Garbodor, and 1 Wall deck. The Wall deck, I believe, was made up of Hoopa, the non-EX, non-GX Hoopa, which can't be hit by GXs or EXs, Xurkitree, and Wishy-Washy GX. I haven't seen the deck list, I just know that those 3 cards were what people were talking about. I believe it's on stream as well, but I didn't watch that match. So let's start talking about some of these decks. Zoroark Lycanroc. Michael Pramawat used Zoroark Lycanroc to win the whole tournament. This was his 7th regional win. Michael Pram could retire today and he'd be a Pokemon legend. He has such an amazing career, so congrats to him. 10 Zoroark Lycanroc decks made day 2, as I mentioned. This deck was not present at the last large standard tournament, but gained a lot of hype between then and Memphis. The deck has a similar build to Tord Reklev's EUIC winning Zoroark Golisopod list, and you can hear me talk more about that and what goes into building this deck in my full analysis on the deck, which I uploaded a few days ago, and you can find that in the description of this video. So, with incredible consistency and mostly 50-50 in favorable matchups, this deck found its spot in Tier 1. It's right beside Gardevoir. Maybe it'll prove to be even better than Gardevoir. So here we have Rahul Reddy's list of Zoroark Lycanroc. He placed top 8 at Memphis. Noted techs in his list are Mewtwo from Evolutions, Buzzwole GX, Zoroark Breakthrough, and Multi-Switch. I'm a huge fan of Multi-Switch. I've been testing that out in my list as well. Everything else seems pretty basic here. He's running 3 Bridget, 4 Puzzle of Time, a 4 line of Zoroark GX with the 1 Zoroark Mind Jack, 3-2 line of Lycanroc. Like I said, I made a video going over Zoroark Lycanroc as an archetype, so you can hear me talk about that more over there. And this is the champion list for Michael Pramawat. Something I want to note here is he did not use any tech attackers, and he focused on consistency. He has a 4-3 line of Lycanroc and a 4-4 line of Zoroark and 3 Tapu Lele. That's it for the Pokemon. He was comfortable with just having a thick line of everything he wanted to see, so he would see it as much as possible. Something I will note here is that he used Energy Lotto over Multi-Switch. I know that's been a preference call for people with building this deck. Do you want Energy Lotto or Multi-Switch? He chose Energy Lotto, and I'm sure it helped him get to the first place. Next is Buzzwole Lycanroc. So Buzzwole Lycanroc took 2 spots at the top 8 of EUIC, the European Intercontinentals. Personally, I did not see or hear much hype about this deck until the week leading up to Memphis. Like I said, Zoroark Lycanroc and Decidueye Zoroark, I was hearing people are going to be playing this. I was expecting to see people play that. But Buzzwole Lycanroc, I didn't hear hype up until the few days before Memphis. I've been testing this deck out ever since it did well at EUIC, and I think it's really consistent and aggressive. We've been playing in a standard format in which decks take time to set up, and this deck really capitalizes on that. So, for instance, Buzzwole can start getting KOs as early as turn 1, and then Lycanroc can use its ability to gust Pokemon up from your opponent's bench as early as turn 2. So you can knock out whatever's active, then next turn bring something else up that your opponent wanted to keep safe, and KO that with Buzzwole. And this deck uses Max Elixir to accelerate energy, so you can stream attackers more efficiently. This is Pablo Mesa, also known as Tablemon. His list placed 3rd at Memphis with this Buzzwole. So he placed 3rd at Memphis with this Buzzwole Lycanroc deck. Notable techs in his list are Multi-Switch and Sudowoodo. He's also playing 2 Regirock EX and no Zygarde EX. His list is pretty basic, but it got the job done. It's consistent and it's really aggressive. I watched it on stream. I think I watched just about every game Pablo played on stream this past weekend, and the deck just ran so smoothly for him. So, Gardevoir GX. It only took up 2 spots of the top 35, and none made top 8. So where was Gardevoir GX at? I think that we saw many top players choose to go with more consistent archetypes like Buzzwole, Lycanroc, and Zoroark Lycanroc. Pablo Mesa. He, Tablemon, he played Buzzwole Lycanroc, and he's a known Gardevoir GX player. He top 8'd Worlds with it this past year, and he won Vancouver Regionals with it a few months ago, maybe a couple months ago. So we even saw him switch over to Buzzwole Lycanroc, and my personal opinion is that these players found decks with 50-50 matchups. Buzzwole, Zoroark Lycanroc, Zoroark Golisopod, um, even Golisopod Gardevoir, Zoroark Lycanroc, with 50-50 matchups that consistently set up and favored that over Gardevoir GX's immense power that comes with inconsistencies. So my hypothesis is that people built these decks, tested them, found that they were 50-50 matchups, and if they played better than their opponent, they would win, and that these decks were consistently doing what they wanted them to do. And they decided to take that over Gardevoir's aggressive, immense power that some games it can just steamroll, but other games it's really inconsistent and all you see is a Curlia. Like we saw in a stream match with, I believe it was Forest versus Pablo. Forest was the Gardevoir player that got ninth place. He bubbled out of top 8 at Memphis. But there's games where you just struggle to get a single Gardevoir GX up, and then there's games where you just sweep your opponent with a couple really powerful Gardevoir GXs. So players, I think they decided to go with a 50-50 matchup deck that consistently set up. They had to work for their wins, but they consistently drew the cards they needed to see. I still rank Gardevoir GX as tier 1, and I don't expect the archetype to fall off completely, but it seems that we have found a couple of archetypes that can compete for that number 1 spot for the first time this season, and that's really exciting to me. That we have Zoroark Lycanroc, Buzzwole Lycanroc, Zoroark Golisopod, even Golisopod Gardevoir is back in action. And maybe some of these decks can compete for that best deck in format title, or we will just have a few best deck in formats. But I think this is a really healthy meta, and there's a handful of decks that you could play and win a tournament with right now. So, Golisopod Garb returns. Azul placed second with Golisopod Gardevoir. This archetype was tier 1 after taking second at 2017 World Championships, but recently fell off after the release of Zoroark GX, which has proven to partner well with Golisopod GX. So people kind of stopped playing the Gardevoir with Golisopod and made Golisopod as the backup plan to Zoroark GX, like we saw with Tord's deck. And people have been talking about Golisopod Garb being inconsistent and just play Zoroark Golisopod instead. And I agree, Golisopod Garb falters to late game ends because you have Garbotoxin out, you can't use your Lele's to get supporters, and it doesn't play draw power like Octillery and Zoroark GX. So, why was Golisopod Gardevoir a good meta call for Memphis? Well, Golisopod is good against archetypes featuring Lycanroc GX because you can just one-shot them. Golisopod's grass, Lycanroc is weak to grass. And you can one-shot it for just 1 energy. Players have been lowering the count of Field Blower in their lists, making Garbotoxin more likely to impact games. So we saw the Tord deck play 4 Field Blower, which if your plan is to have Garbotoxin out for the game and you're playing against something with 4 Field Blower and 4 Puzzle of Time in it, you're probably not going to achieve that game plan. But people have been taking Field Blowers out because people have been discouraged to play Garbotoxin. So it kind of just goes in a circle. People put more Field Blower in so Garbotoxin stopped being played as much. Garbotoxin stopped being played as much. People lowered their Field Blowers. So Garbotoxin is more likely to impact games again. Azul hasn't posted his list yet, but if you go back and watch the stream, you can pretty much figure out most of his list. And the commentator said he was running 4 enhanced hammers, and on stream we saw those hammers do a lot of work. So if you're going to try this out, I would suggest go ahead, build a classic Golisopod Garb list. There's plenty out there from other regionals, and try to fit in 4 enhanced hammers, or maybe 3 if you don't want to go all out for them. But yeah, so Golisopod Gardevoir might be back. I think it was a really good meta call on Azul's part, and congratulations to him for second place. So let's talk about rogue decks. I'm not going to put these on my tier list. A couple of them were in day 2 of Memphis. But I expect to see more Golisopod decks pop up. At Memphis, Golisopod Garb, even though it's been seen and it was at tier 1 a couple months ago, it you could almost call Golisopod Garb a rogue deck, just because I'm sure Azul was one of the only people playing it, and I know he was the only person playing it in day 2. Excuse me. So I expect to see more Golisopod decks pop up. Um, Namely Golisopod Octillery. So Golisopod Octillery, I believe one of the Lesage brothers made this popular and included Gumshoes in it. I'm not sure if while I'm testing it, I'm going to have Gumshoes in it. But on paper, this should have a good matchup against Lycanroc variants while not having a Zoroark GX of its own to be one-hit KO'd by Lycanroc. So I'm going to be testing this out starting today against Zoroark Lycanroc, against Buzzwole Lycanroc, against Gardevoir, against all the decks I expect to see at all of the League Cups coming up for quarter 2. Because I think Golisopod Octillery, I don't know, it sounds good right now in my head. Hopefully it'll work out. So, with Gardevoir decks on the decline and some Gardy players switching back to Sylveon GX, I think spread decks might be able to come back into the meta. With all these Zoroark GX based decks and Lycanroc and just so many decks that are having 4 or more GX Pokemon on the field at a time, Necrozma GX Meowstic sounds really, really good right now. I'm going to be testing that, so I might have a video out soon on Necrozma GX Meowstic spread package kind of deal. But I'm pretty hyped to try that out because Blackray GX put 500 damage on your opponent's side and move it all around with Meowstic next turn. It just sounds pretty cool. And lastly, for rogue decks, I think we might see some copycats looking for success with Shining Genesect Venusaur, which is an archetype that Harrison Grandish took to a top 16 finish in Memphis. I believe specifically he placed 10th, and he went into day 2 at 702. So congrats to him for being innovative and using a deck that nobody else was playing. To finish off this video, we're going to look at my standard tier list for post-Memphis. So this is pretty much what I'm expecting at the upcoming Standard League Cups. Tier 1, Zoroark Lycanroc, Buzzwole Lycanroc, Gardevoir GX. No specific order. I think all 3 of these decks can fight for the number 1 spot. Gardevoir GX was number 1 for a while, but I think that's going to change. I believe we saw Zoroark Golisopod take the most CP at League Cups last weekend or 2 weekends ago over Gardevoir for the first time in a while. So I think these are the 3 tier 1 decks. I think these are all really solid. I think all 3 of these decks will be winning League Cups left and right. Expect to see these decks at your League Cups. Tier 2, Zoroark Golisopod, Decidueye Zoroark, Golisopod Garbodor. So, Golisopod Garbodor, I'm putting it in there. It's back from the dead, kinda, maybe, after Azul got second place with it. We'll see how it turns out. This is kind of maybe it'll pay off putting it in the tier list. Maybe it won't even see play, and I'll just take it right out. But for now, I'm going to put it in tier 2. And the tier 2 decks, I wouldn't be surprised if these won League Cups. But I don't think they're what you'll see the bulk of at your League Cups. I think those top 3 in tier 1 are what we're going to see in the next couple weeks. But these decks are really good. I wouldn't suggest you against playing them. If you like one of these decks, I would say go for it, win the tournament with it, because they're really good decks. So tier 3, these are decks where they have some problems in the meta. They have either inconsistencies or some really poor matchups. So these decks are Vikabulu, Greninja, Volcanion, Metagross. Metagross was good because it beats Gardevoir, but with Sylveon GX and Gardevoir, it doesn't even always beat it. And players are putting Sylveon GX back in Gardevoir. So personally, I have no motive to play Metagross at a tournament. Regardless of the tournament, I just don't want to play the deck. It's clunky. It doesn't even always beat its best matchup. Volcanion, I don't have a lot of testing with it in the past few weeks since the meta has been shifting a bit. but I don't like its Gardevoir matchup. If Gardevoir diminishes in play, if Gardevoir goes down to a tier 2 deck, maybe Volcanion can move up to a tier 2 deck. But right now, I don't see Volcanion doing huge things. I think it's a good deck, but it's not anywhere near my top 3 choices. Greninja. I I just don't like Greninja. It's inconsistent. Um, if you are a Greninja player, you might have it in your tier 1 list. Understandable if you do well with it. I just see it brick a lot. I I don't know. I don't personally want to play a deck that bricks a lot or suggest my testing partners or my friends to play a deck that bricks a lot. It also just loses to a Giratina promo, and a deck that loses to one card just isn't very. It doesn't make me want to play it. And next is Vikabulu. Vikabulu had some hype going into Memphis. It took 3 spots in day 2, but no spots in top 8. It has on paper good matchups versus Zoroark Golisopod and Zoroark Lycanroc and Buzzwole Lycanroc. And if you play Kukui, I hear it's good against Gardevoir, but a lot of this is on paper. I know there are people that really like this deck. Like I said earlier, I believe I said people love this deck and people love to hate it. I don't hate it. I know that it can be a good deck. It's just never a good deck for me. I think it's inconsistent and clunky, and a lot of its matchups are those kind of matchups that look good on paper when everything goes your way. I think it is at the top of tier 3. It's probably the deck in here that I would most likely move to tier 2. But we'll see how the meta goes for it. And not sure where they fit is a category I made for Buzzwole Garb and Drampa Espeon Garb. So, Drampa Garb, we thought it was going to be dead when Gardevoir came out, and it was still doing really, really well. Right now, it looks like it's kind of gone, like it's kind of out of the meta, but I know there are people that'll try to bring it back. We'll see how that goes. So right now, I'm really not sure where Drampa Espeon Garb falls. And Buzzwole Garbodor took a spot in day 2. Haven't heard too much about it. I've tested it a bunch, and it has that same aggression that Buzzwole Lycanroc has, but it doesn't have a lot of mid to late game power other than the Garbotoxin lock. So I would just rather play Buzzwole Lycanroc. And that is my post-meta analysis for Memphis Regionals 2017. Hope you all liked the video. Subscribe to my channel if you do and you want to see more content from me. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm going to start streaming soon, hopefully by the end of the month. So you can see information on all of that there. So, yeah, have a good day, guys.